Welcome to the FarmBits podcast.
FarmBits is proudly produced by the Nebraska Digital Agriculture team and hosted by students at the University of Nebraska.
The FarmBits podcast comes to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews with expert producers and innovators from across the agriculture industry, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agricultural technology.
Hello, FarmBits followers, and welcome to another episode of the FarmBits podcast. I'm Camila Rodriguez.
And I'm Victor Ferreira, and we are glad to have you with us as we begin our discussion on soil health and associated technologies.
Hello everyone. I'm CaroCordova, soil scientist by training. My current position at UNL is assistant professor and a statewide soil health specialist. I'm native from South America, and my bachelor's is in industry engineering, and I have a bachelor's in soil science from Iowa State University. Before coming to UNL, I work as a associate at Michigan State University, and also as a research coordinator for the Great Lakes Bioenergy Research Center, funded by the DOE. And now that, I joined UNL in the fall of 2022, and I co-lead the water cropping system hub, the soil health team, particularly along with Katia Kohler-Cole, who is an extension educator and who was not being able to join today.
Considering soil health, what is it and which factors should be considered?
Great, that's a great question. So that's, everyone's wondering about what is soil health. And, in the past, there were like several other terms that we use, and now the term has changed, right? So in the past, we talk about soil quality, soil till, soil fertility, and now we're talking about soil health. And soil health is actually, measuring the capacity of the soil to function as a living ecosystem, so that could sustain different ways of life, not only plants. So a healthy soil will promote like healthy plants, healthy animals, and healthy communities. So that's, what entails the term. So in the past, those other terms were mainly focused on soil fertility, nutrients, so mostly into the chemical side or the chemical aspect of the soil. But now with soil health, we're talking about the interaction of physical, chemical, and biological properties that allow the system to host different living forms.
Good. How are sensor technologies being used to monitor and assess soil health parameters?
So regarding like sensor technologies, the one that, first of all, like many farmers are looking into different ways to manage their fields effectively, more efficiently, but also investing themselves in adopting new practices that will allow them to reduce the all-farm costs, right? Like the inputs, reduce the inputs from external resources, such as like, fertilizers or some amendments that will, increase fertility. So they're now looking into ways to work with nature, right? Working with, in terms of like, for example, promoting more microbes or promoting more worm growth in their fields that will help them to decompose the residues faster. So regarding the sensor technologies, that they are like, some are like investing in their fields. Of course, that, in a smaller scale, like in a small farmer, like, for example, an urban farmer might not be that much, into investing in technology because, probably there is not an economic return. But like in the farming industry, we see now farmers investing in soil moisture sensors, in other sensors that, probably could be adapted into their tractors to look into some different soil properties, and that could like, inform them about like, where are like more nutrients located, like what are like, more fertile soils and where are like others like have some deficiencies. So some of these sensors are not like particularly into or like measuring directly the soil properties, but through the plants, the plants are used kind of as sensors of what's going on in the soil. So when you have like a yield monitor in a tractor, you get these yield maps, and you start to understand like where are like parts of your land that are underperforming, and then you start to like wonder like what's going on in those patches of land, right? And then you go into like, okay, let's go and do some soil sampling, and let's pay attention to that part of my field. So there are like different sensors that we are talking about, right? So then we have aerial imagery too, that, as I mentioned, in order to know what's going on with the soil, like also the plant will express how fertile is the soil, right? So with the greenness, when we are measuring with the NDVI, with aerial imagery, with drones, we're determining like where are like the yellowish patches in the land, right? So that's a patch or like a spot where probably there are like deficient levels of nutrients. With that information that we could couple from those different sensor technologies, either like the ones that are like embedded in drones or embedded in the harvesters, or probably there are like others that could be in situ installed, like the TDRs that are like soil moisture, temperature, and also could measure electrical conductivity. All that information from all these different levels can give us like a sense of what's going on below our feet. So that's something that we put in context of all this information to get like real-time data of the soil, like how the soil is performing, also our crops, and tell us about like how is the health of our system, right? Like we're looking into using these systems approach. So I think that that's something that currently we are using. Of course, that is complex and could be only applied at the farming industry level, and not so much in a smaller scale.
And Caro, have you been using any sensors in your research?
So yes, the sensors that we have are more like to do like of course that they are not the ones that are like staying in the field the whole time, right? Like as TDRs or TDRs as an example, but the ones that we bring right away to the field and take like a snapshot of what's going on like in a specific date under like certain conditions. So the sensors that we use is like penetrometers. We use also infrared spectroscopy. So that is new technology that is that we are like commercially available, and you get like a soil probe that has these sensors, and you could get different soil properties at the same time. Like the ones that we could claim that are like reliable data, it's organic carbon, bulk density, and texture. Of course that the different brands could advertise that these probes can measure 21 soil parameters, but actually when you ask and follow up, the accuracy is it's very low for some of those measurements, but highly confident for like the first ones that I mentioned. So beyond that, we have moisture meters. Yes, we come and measure moisture, pH meters, other probes that can measure also temperature. So those are the ones that we use right now in our lab.
Carol, which one of those sensor tools that you mentioned, which ones of those tools or sensors are being more used or more accessible for farmers? Do you see an increase of adoption of those sensors or tools by the farmers?
So yeah, that's a good question. So always depend on the price, right? That determines accessibility. So there are some that, when I bring them to my workshops or to my trainings or to like when I visit farmers, they ask me like, okay, how much does it cost the soil penetrometer, that measure compaction. And I tell them that is, around $1,500. And they say like, I'm not getting one of those. That's too much, right? And I was like, but you have a big farm, right? Like, it's something that I was like, never thought that 1,500 was a lot. But there are some, they make wise decisions and think about like, how often they're going to use it. And so they do like these analyses of cost benefit, right? And they rather like probably keep into the traditional way of measuring soil properties, that is, taking soil samples, send them to the lab, and then wait for results and do it that not very frequently. They do it like every 5 years or 7, or when they see like some deficiency or problem. So we recommend to do soil sampling, every 3 years minimum, to get to know what's, probably do some amendments. So in terms of the technology, it's something that you see that small farmers are more hesitant in getting in, using the sensors, but then there are others that are like, really want to make the management of their field more effectively and efficient. So they're looking for ways to like, monitor like what's going on in their fields, and with that be more effective in the use of the resources, right? If they need to apply fertilizer, so they know that the price is always fluctuates and most likely goes up every year. So they are into like, okay, so what's going on? Do I need like probably just lime, and that will like probably increase my fertility, or do I need to like work with compost? But everything, everything, all of those decisions are tied to how big is the farm, and how much they're willing to like play around with technology, right? And how interested are they into like using technology too, right? Because there is also these a learning curve, right, to get into adopt new tools into their farms, into their systems.
You mentioned about the fertility, how you can optimize by using those technologies. Do you have other examples that using sensors and other technologies and precision agriculture can help farmers?
Yes. So the case that I mentioned earlier of, like starting from that many farmers have a yield monitor, right? So that's a sensor that it comes already embedded in their combines, and they've been getting annually the data from, how many bushels per acre are getting like in their southern side of their field versus the northern part, or like east and west. So they know like, in real time they have the data of, the performance of like big pieces of land, and combining all of these data, like and archiving annual yields. They could like put together the story about what's going on in their fields, right? So currently we have, there are several research programs that are studying these yield maps and overlapping them, like, in like, I don't know, in the last 10 years, they overlap them with with the with their georeference locations, right? Because they can get, these beautiful, colorful maps, yield maps of their fields, right? And if they overlap them, like, probably 10 years, they combine the data from 10 years, the yields from like, each point, GPS point, they could see like, the variability of the yields over this period of time, right? Like 10 years. And they could define, like, if they have been stable, right? They could define areas that the yield were stable, or the yield was like, very unstable and highly variable, or areas or zones that, it has been actually always underperforming, right? Like below what could be claimed to be like productive, or like something that they can get revenue. And actually those zones have been acting as sinkholes, right? They were putting lots of resources in those areas because they have managed their fields homogeneously, right? They have applied the same nitrogen rate, they have applied the same amount of water, like across the land, assuming that the land is homogeneous, which is not, right? Like we have seen that, with topography, the soil changes, with management changes, and then there are areas that are very poor, and farmers need to like acknowledge that those poor areas are like sinkholes of resources and money. So with that, with just like yield maps, they could like determine like where are the areas that probably need to come out of production, and those soils need to be treated differently, right? So perhaps they need to be out of production, yes, but not let them fallow, right? Perhaps there needs to be like, I don't know, another type of crop that could build up fertility, right? Could be like patches of native plants, or patches of, I don't know, like forest or something that could really like remediate whatever that is going on there. Or probably, was a wetland that was, brought up into, turned into arable land. And actually, that land was probably never, was never a good idea to transform it into an arable land. So now we need to rethink about, the way that we design farms, but also with all the information that we have right now. So, there's no need to jump into like, for me, recommend them to like, oh, let's get this soil prof and let's measure these different soil properties, but rather like, okay, let's just study your yields, your yield maps, and let's manage your field appropriately. Because as I mentioned earlier, like plants can also act as other sensors, like natural sensors. It's they're expressing what's going on below ground, right? Like if it's like highly fertile or not. So we could see that like through different colors, like the plant height and so on.
How are data and machine learning utilized in analyzing soil health data for predictive modeling?
That's, regarding the data analytics and like regarding analyzing soil health data, what are we using? So the information that we're using first is, we need to define like like the soil type that we are dealing with, right? So there are beautiful soil maps and soil information that are available to the public that, one is the NRCS web soil survey that people have access, can determine like, get their soil maps, get information about, what are the expected levels of organic matter, texture, what were the forming factors of that particular land. So get more like, background information of those. So that information is super crucial when we are like into like, studying soil health. So the other thing is the environment too, right? We need to know like the type of environment, like precipitation regimes and so on. That information gets in. And then, the one that we are like, from all the different parameters that we could measure from soil health, the one that I highly recommend and the one that is, the backbone of soil health is organic carbon. And why organic carbon? Why soil organic carbon? And it's mainly because it's the one that, 68% of organic matter or 58% of organic matter is organic carbon. So like organic carbon is the backbone of organic matter. And we know that organic matter, it is the element that builds fertility, right, in the soil, that carries all the different organic compounds that microbes love, and also other soil fauna love to, that could recycle different nutrients. So that's, the information that now we are trying to keep track on changes in organic carbon. And not only because, it also could be used as a mitigation of climate change, but it is for building fertility, right? The one that we are interested in. So it's kind of killing two birds with one bullet. So that is type of information that we need, the basic information. And that will lead us into like data analysis and also machine learning that could help us to do some forecasting of the potential of a field, the field potential on sequestering carbon, on accumulating carbon, or even like reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So there are like different practices that could help promote that, right? So we're talking about, when in terms of soil health, we recommend farmers that have been, conventionally manage their fields to adopt a soil health practice or a regenerative ag practice, such as like no-till, cover crops, or diversify their system by, like going beyond like a monoculture, going into like, rotate 2 crops, 3, and so on. So that's something that, we will try to encourage farmers to adopt. So these, creating these large data sets of the information that I mentioned before, like the soil types, the environment, and other soil health parameters will help us to identify patterns, trends, and correlations, and the functionality too, right? So many people will be asking about productivity, right? Or the economics of adopting soil health practices. So definitely that needs to, be in place for quite some time in order to quantify those aspects.
Ricardo, about the data, do you think it's easy to farmers analyze them, put that information together and make decisions, or you think that they need an extra help to analyze all those data?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, because now we're talking about like big data, right? And it's not like, they are not used to, people are not that used to manage data that combines different aspects. Like, for example, like you're working with the environmental data, right? Like with precipitation, with temperature. And then I'm talking about like soil properties, like, soil texture or soil carbon. And then on top of that, like yields, like historical yields. So in order to understand what's going on in a field, you need like data for at least like 5 years or 10 years minimum, right? To understand what are the patterns, what are like, the fluctuations of yields. And for a farmer, there are like very savvy farmers that, have been managing and keep like good records of their fields. But then there are some others that were not trained on like keeping records, right? So there is where, managing this big data definitely needs, it calls for some help, right? And there is where we come in, right? Like UNL has great graduate students that are like studying different ways to manage effectively these big data sets. And then also we have extension educators that are right there, like in the front line in different counties across the state. And UNL also always has the communication channels open to help out in different ways, right? There are like some trainings too that extension, UNL extension offers to help on these. So, it's better to reach out in case that you don't know, right? Or you feel overwhelmed. So it could be overwhelming to manage these big data sets, or want to start now to keep track on or keep saving the information that they're getting like annually. So it is always to get some help from someone that knows data science.
So, Carol, what emerging technologies are being explored for soil remediation and restoration?
Great. So going into the other side of the coin, right? We're talking about soil health now. We're talking about polluted soils. So there are like emerging technologies for soil remediation and restoration. We have, as examples, the use of biochar, the use of phytoremediation, also microbial biodegradation, and also using some other organic amendments, like organic matter could be also helpful for this part. So regarding like the first example that I give you guys, the biochar. So biochar, in some cases is popular, in some others it's not. All depends how far it is the plant that is producing it. But biochar or char, in the past, like some other indigenous communities use char for increase the pH of very acidic soils, right? So the charcoal or char or biochar it has a very high pH level, so it is alkaline and helps to increase the pH level of the soil when you add it. So that helps with the use of biochar helps with controlling heavy metals, right? We know that heavy metals are highly available at low pHs. So when you increase the pH, then you are like kind of locking those heavy metals in place, so the plant will not uptake those. We have other uses for biochar too, to retain moisture, and what else? And other organic pollutants. So an expert that we have in place that is doing research on the use of biochar in agricultural fields is Michael Kaiser. So he's a soil chemist working here at the Department of Agronomy. And it will be cool, if you guys want to follow up about biochar in his projects. Then on the other hand, we have phytoremediation, and that's, a very eco-friendly, low-cost remediation technique, where you use plants to uptake all the heavy metals or other pollutants that you have in the field, right? So the plants will uptake them anyway. But of course, you use plants that are like non-food crops, right? So in those cases, you use probably trees, you use some grasses, and those will be the ones that will uptake the heavy metals. And if you harvest them, you are like removing with their biomass whatever excess of heavy metals that you have there. And then we'll also prevent other pollutants to go into the river. So here comes like very cool projects that and strategies of using this technology, the phytoremediation, of installing some buffer strips along like contour lines, or like rivers. In the river shores, you have these big grasses like tall grasses or forests, or a mix of air or herbaceous species that will be the ones that if the farm has meets or it is close to a river or another water body, to have those buffer zones of plants that in case that you have been applying manure or any other fertilizer, like nitrate, phosphorus, there will be excess for sure, right? We know that the plants are not that efficient, and in terms of fertilizer, the plants will only uptake 50%, and the other probably 50% is going to be lost either through volatilization or runoff, right? So that runoff, that excess, will be captured by these plants. These tall plants, or very demanding plants that you have like right before, you have them at the shore, right? Or like in these contour lines of your field. So that's pretty cool, right? So the plants will be the ones helping you to reduce the concentration levels of those pollutants and prevent them to go into the water bodies. And then the other one, the microbial bioremediation. that's another pretty cool strategy or technology to use. So another colleague here at UNL, Steve Comfort, he's an environmental chemist that works at the School of Natural Resources. He has been, researching this topic, and it is, finding ways to promote microbial growth. So saying that, you have a polluted soil with oil, like, probably could be gasoline or like car oil. So you have this soil that is polluted with oil, and we know that oil is rich in carbon, right? So if you add, for example, nitrogen or a nitrogenous compound, like for example, nitrate, or any other fertilizer that has nitrogen to that soil, that will promote microbial activity, right? So you are like feeding the microbes with more nitrogen, you're giving them nitrogen. So then the microbes are going to digest that excess of carbon from the car oil and will release carbon dioxide. So there is, the mechanism of how microbial bioremediation works. And similar in other ways of, adding organic matter into the system that is just to promote microbial growth. So you are kind of feeding the microbes, feeding the I call them the soil engineers, to like decompose whatever that you have there that, it is an unbalance. So those are the different soil remediations strategies that we use. And that could be, not only like researchers are using, but, some others are also using them.
Nice that you're sharing with us resources, examples, so names. Thank you for that. Thank you very much to Dr. Córdova for taking the time to join this episode of the FarmBits podcast.
It's really exciting to learn more about soil health and all the emerging technologies.
One of my favorite parts of this episode was the thinking evolution of how farmers are managing their soil health from total area to specific areas.
For me, I found interesting the part that Dr. Córdova mentioned about sensors and drones that can be employed to help understand soil health and by the end of the day, decision making.
I hope you
Thank you for taking the time to join us today on the FarmBits podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast to be informed about the latest content each week.
We welcome your feedback, so if you have comments or questions for us, please reach out to us over email, on Twitter, or in the reviews section of your favorite podcast platform. Our contact information can be found in the show notes.
We would like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support for this podcast and their commitment to providing high-quality informational material to members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the host and guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the views of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of FarmBits.